Rabbi Ari has graciously agreed to stop his tour of VBS greeting old friends and spend an hour with us. Rabbi grew up here at VBS, basically. He is the senior rabbi of Temple Etz Chaim in Thousand Oaks, a rapidly growing congregation in that area in Conejo Valley, which is wonderful. He was mentored by Rabbi Schulweis, and you'll hear some stories about that this morning. And when he was ordained, he was introduced at the ordainment ceremony. It turned out Rabbi Schulweis had passed away already, but he was introduced by Malka Schulweis as candidate for ordination. Right? So he's got some background here. He's also our podcast host for our series that the Schulweis Institute runs, and you'll hear about that in a few minutes. He's given me about 4 minutes to talk about the Schulweis Institute specifically, and then I'm going to turn it over to Rabbi Ari for all the things he's going to pull out of his hat and entertain you with today. Okay, the Schulweis Institute was started by 10 families on the occasion of Rabbi Schulweis's 80th birthday. They put in a lot of money to endow the foundation, and the purpose of the Institute is to share with generations to come Rabbi Schulweis's vision of Jewish life and Jewish learning as developed at VBS during his tenure here. We have several ways that we're trying to do that. One of them is our website. It's hmsi.info. And what that is, it's your entry point to discover Rabbi Schulweis's teachings, moral vision, depth of community activism that continue to inspire us and enrich our lives today. And we have the world's largest collection of memorabilia of Rabbi Schulweis, his works. We have 4,000 of his personal books that he's marked up by hand, and a lot of other things that may be of interest to you. And on our website, we basically use it as your path to find any information you're looking for about Rabbi Schulweis, text, audio, or video. We also have displays that we're mounting. If you're here today and you want to spend a little bit of time, go over to the Eli and Mark Leiner Beit Midrash here near the Schulweis Chapel, the back of the Schulweis Chapel, and we do exhibits of the material from the archives that we have in our library. And there's always an interesting exhibit over there. Outreach programs that we funded in the past, I'm not going to read all of these, but basically we're involved particularly now with the Jewish Community Children's Choir and performances with Noreen Green and her LA Jewish Symphony and other outreach programs as they apply to us for funding. This is a little part of the homepage for the website. We basically use the homepage as a place for you to skim and see what you're interested in. Then you just do one click and you get to whatever is interesting you that's listed here on the home page. And if you want to look at what the exhibits look like, this is a current exhibit in the shelves of the Beit Midrash right across the hall here. So definitely try and take a look at that. And finally, every year we do a commemoration of the Rabbi's Yortzeit in December. This one is December 19th. We just finished the planning for that. It'll include Shabbat dinner. You have to pay for that, but everything else is free. You can come to services, and there'll be a concert with Cantor Raffi and the VBS Community Choir conducted by Noreen. And this program also marks the end of a program we've had for the year. It was 100th year since the Rabbi's birth, and we had a celebration of that. So with that, Rabbi Ari.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. I love being here. Is this one also good? I love being here. I love speaking about Rabbi Schulweis As Bill mentioned before, he was my rabbi when I was a kid. He was God up on the pulpit. If you were here in those days, there was something sacred about this person. And I feel lucky that I get to keep learning about him and from him now. I go to his website quite regularly. The website is hmsi.info, the Harold M. Schulweis Institute. And it's a way for us to look at his poetry, at video recordings, at voice recordings. It's also amazing that he gave a sermon every Friday night that was Yom Kippur worthy. This was back in the day. There were hundreds of people that would come to services here on a Friday night. And then the scope of it was just so much. And so I love that I get to still visit with him. And pardon me that you're going to see all the things on my computer. Right. They would open up the back on a normal Friday night. And now we go into the Liner Chapel for a service on a Friday night, which is so lovely. At my synagogue in Thousand Oaks, we're so far away from where Jews live. And, and so when we get 40 people, we're very happy. And to think that a generation ago, in 1985, there would be 1,000 people here on a Friday night to hear the wisdom of this rabbi. And so there's a reason that all these years ago, 20 years ago, people thought we need to keep his memory, his legacy, his Torah alive. And now the Institute is going through a big change right now. That they've brought in the next generation of leaders, some who knew him when they were like me, who knew him when we were children, and just so we can keep talking about how to spread the gospel of Schulweis, how to share his books, his works with the next generation of rabbis and cantors and educators. So I want to show you a few pieces of the website with huge thank you to Bill, who really put this whole thing together. The website, which we're looking at right now, has so many pieces to it. So we're going to look a little bit about his origin story, especially with Malka, his wife. We'll look at some of his theology, how he understood God, because he was probably one of the three rabbis to rethink theology, rethink God in a post-Holocaust era. To think of before the Holocaust, so much of what we thought of God was actually very Greek. Very God, we are puppets and God is directing our lives. And that's why we pray, a lot of our prayers, and some people are still in this mindset, which is okay, a lot of our prayers used to be, God, heal me. God, I hope this person wins the election. God, as if God is coming down and we're just puppets of God, right? God, I want a puppy. And then God somehow delivers a puppy to you? I don't know. And so it's really hard to use that theology after the Shoah, after the Holocaust. I mean, I think it was hard before that too, but after the Holocaust to think, why would God give me an A on this test or get this cute girl to like me if God couldn't stop the Shoah, the Holocaust? And so there was a necessary reworking of our relationship to God. And Rabbi Schulweis was one of the great thinkers and leaders in that time. So we'll look at a piece of that. And he has a way of explaining it that makes sense to normal people, not just people who speak in 5-syllable words. And then I'll show you parts of the podcast. But we'll start with this, which is, let's see if this works. I know you have an amazing team here. I'm always wary of using technology. That's why I became a rabbi and I left the film industry because it lost me. All right, so let's see if this goes.
If you're a rabbi, you're born over and over again. At every birth, at every marriage, at every bar mitzvah, at every funeral, you were born over and over again.
Rabbi Schulweis is a person who influences everyone he comes into contact with.
He has the world's most unique ability to connect the insights of the ancient tradition with the world as it is now.
He made people realize what Judaism is all about.
His mind is so active. Wouldn't it be a good idea to do this? Wouldn't it be a good idea to do that?
Controversial, probably, yes.
He wasn't afraid to broach subjects that other people were afraid to talk about.
He's inexhaustible. And by now he should be done with ideas. All I remember about the services was this massive cranium and these great big hands and this booming voice.
And when he gave a sermon, he really got into it. You could see he was doing it with all his heart and all his soul.
I'll tell you that if you want to see Rabbi Schulweis at his very best, you should see him with his wife Malka.
I can tell you what I was most proud of from day one, that I became interested in him as a life partner to this very day. And that is that the public figure and the private figure are the same. I wasn't interested in boys and dating. It was entirely out of my ken.
I had girlfriends like everybody else did. As a young man, I was at the seminary.
And my dear friend said to me, you know, there's going to be a Purim dance. Let's go. And I said, no, I'm not interested.
Dancing was not the important thing at all. It was just an excuse.
I went to the dance, and this young man asked me to dance. And in the course of that, we found out that we both lived fairly close to one another in the Bronx. And that was the beginning.
She once came, she was studying at Queens College. She came with a bunch of books. And she was telling me about one of the great Yeats or somebody in poetry. And I asked her to read some to me. And she did. And that was it. That was it.
He took me out. We had a good time. And it was either on the first date or the second date when he proposed to me.
I was very, very hard in a hurry. She lived in the Bronx. I was already in Manhattan. It was a terrible slap back and forth.
And I told him, I don't know you. And it was the truth.
And she said to me, I remember, you know, we don't know each other that well. I said, okay, we'll wait. Fourth date, she said, all right. She did not like, that was the first tension we had, is I took her to the Marx Brothers Marathon. I loved that. She hated.
I love you. All of you.
Oh, not here, monsieur. Not here.
Oh, I can't help it. It's just the animal in me.
If that didn't break us up, then there's reason to understand why this has lasted 58 years.
I realized that there's also another aspect. I have got to be compatible with her, and she's got to understand what her button is. Marx Brothers are not going to be that. So we read Karl Marx. That was it.
So we both accommodated to those differences.
There is a wonderful midrash, a rabbinic tale, which says that God says it is easier to split the Red Sea than to keep two people together. And boy, they were right.
Our original plan was to wait until he graduated from the seminary, which would have been almost 5 years away.
Which wasn't 3 years. Then it became 2 years.
I don't know how my parents tolerated it. We came and we moved it up a year.
Then it became 1 year.
And then this coming June.
Ah, yes. This was the wedding. June 22nd, 1947. This was the closest thing that I ever did to Al Gore's embrace of Tipper.
And there's more. There's more. We can go for the next hour and watch that, and that alone would be fun. If you didn't know, did you all know Malka? Was she? I mean, as amazing as Rabbi Schulweis was, spending an afternoon with Malka, and you realize that maybe she wrote all of the books. Maybe she wrote all of the sermons. I mean, she was brilliant and funny. She was poetic. So spending time with her was great, and I love going back and watching this and seeing them when they're young is also amazing, because I knew when Rabbi Schulweis officiated my bar mitzvah, he was ancient. He was probably like 50, you know. He was an old man. And so I'm kidding about that. But still, he just always seemed so erudite, so wise, and to get to see him and these pictures and videos of him from much younger is very fun. We'll do just about 3 minutes of this too. Here is Rabbi Schulweis with a very young Rabbi Feinstein. This is a number of years ago, obviously. And they're discussing, there's 14 or so videos of them talking about different subjects. This is them talking about predicate theology. If you don't yet understand Rabbi Schulweis's theology, I think the first few minutes of this, in addition to just showing two friends really talking, also explains his theology, his outlook on God and the world. Predicate. Just to note, I talked about this with a group of high school students last week. I was at Westlake High School, and I brought up predicate theology. I said, how many of you know what a predicate is? And I was very happy to see that, well, there was one, but still, the fact that he knew, the fact that somebody in the class knew predicate means verb, which is, I probably knew that when I was in high school, and then I forgot it for a number of years until I, again, started studying predicate theology.
The second piece that you began to work on, you were working on your doctorate at the GTU.
God, you know more about it. I swear. I never knew. This is like going to an analytic. How much are you going to charge for this?
No, but your doctorate was an extension of, you wrote an article. It was one of the first articles I actually read in medical school on something called predicate theology.
Yeah.
It's a very different, in many ways, radical way of reading theological ideas. So where did that come from? Where did predicate theology come from?
Came from me.
And
I had a difficulty praying. And I realized I had a difficulty praying, and yet I was very moved by some prayers. And then I'll tell you what Harold Kushner, in the book that you edited, called Judaism, 21st Century. Right. Harold Kushner liked the idea of predicate theology, and here he talked about it. Beautiful stuff. He said Ben-Gurion is great. Ben-Gurion once met with a Belgian assimilated Jew. And before the conversation went on, you remember, the guy said, I am first a Belgian, I am first a human being, secondly I'm a Belgian, and only third am I a Jew. And Ben-Gurion said, that's perfectly all right. In Hebrew, we read from right to left. He said the same thing applies to predicate theology. You got the subject, God, and then you have all of the gerundives. God who helps, who loves, who's merciful, etc., etc. Just read it backwards. He had that point. When I taught a confirmation class, and this is true here, I put on the blackboard two little deals. I said, how many believe that God is merciful? So why not? Like the usual deal, the Holocaust and atom bomb and war. I believe that God is good. Same kind of a hesitancy. Very smart kids. How old are they now? About 16, 17. I said, okay, let's do it the other way around. How many believe that mercy is godly? How do you believe that helping the sick is godly? Hands up. I went down a list and I said, well, what do I want? What do I really want from these kids? I want them to believe in what? That God is a person? Or do I want them to believe that godliness is something that they believe in and have to live out in their own lives? So at that particular point, I sort of reversed it and felt that the gerundives, all the ing, helping, loving, that should be the subject of our concern. And I talked to the congregation that way because they don't believe in God. Truth of the matter is, and this is, I wish I were wrong, but I'm right. Most Jews do not believe in God. All the surveys indicate that. You know, we're always down to the last of the group in terms of church attendance, synagogue attendance, belief in God. We're always last. And I say, well, what's wrong with us? It's not just the Holocaust. Well, it's Holocaust there too, but I think they're presented with idea of prayer, which is like that. There he is, God, and God, you are mighty, you are lovely. What has that got to do with me? And I said, that's what we got to do. And the idea was, why don't you horizontalize the vertical? Why don't you? And there's where my tradition, interpretation tradition came in. Because to me, what was important is that human being was a partner with God. He really had parity. So the covenant was not like this, it was like this. That's not the way it was taught at the seminary or yeshiva.
Right.
So that moved me, and then I went to Pacific School of Religion, which is a non-sectarian Christian religion. I was the only Jew and certainly only rabbi. And I said, I wanted to work on theodicy. I said, fine. And then I didn't know what to deal with it. And I read a little monograph by Immanuel Kant about evil, etc., etc. Then I said to myself, what's the question? The question is that the way you defend God makes him out to be very bad. Because what do you say in Job? All the friends say, of course you're suffering. Well, you're a sinner. And if you weren't a sinner, they were a sinner. And that's true of the Gemara over and over again. If you weren't a sinner, your father's a sinner. If you suffer, it's obviously because you're not studying enough. So then I said that title has to be The Morality of God.
It keeps going. If you want to hear a rebuttal to this, if you want to hear somebody who disagrees with Rabbi Schulweis's theology, we have a podcast. A podcast, if you don't know, it's an audio recording. We do it by video, but it's only the audio that we release. We've done a number of episodes. You can see some of them up here. It's on the website. It's wherever you get podcasts. If you have a smartphone, it probably has a podcast app on it. And so we've recorded a number of them. You can't even see who they are up here. But they've included Rabbi Elliot Dorff and the actress Mayim Bialik, among others, and Noah Farkas and Josh Hoffman and other people who you know probably. The one with Elliot Dorff. You know Rabbi Dorff? Rabbi Dorff disagrees with Rabbi Schulweis's theology. And it's fun to hear his take on it. One of the original ideas of the podcast was let's pick 6 people who each address a different aspect of Rabbi Schulweis's career. One on theology and one on keruv, on conversion and welcoming in the stranger. One on Jewish World Watch and those ideas. And it's turned into something else entirely, which is also great. We've just talked to David Wolpe, Adam Greenwald, who's an incredible rabbi in Orange County. I wanted to play 2 clips for you today. This is hard because there's no visual. So if you want, you can close your eyes and pretend like you're stuck on the 405 trying to cross over onto the 101. This is how I listen to podcasts, is in the car. This first one I want to play is by Rabbi B'nai Lappi. She was my first choice for the podcast. She is a rabbi in Chicago. And you'll hear more of her story during this. I think I need to set this up by saying, her story is incredible. Essentially, she gave up on Judaism, moved to Japan, and was in line to become a Buddhist monk. And right before her ordination of being a Buddhist monk, somebody asked the question, what does Judaism say about XYZ? And she said, I don't know. And she decided to leave Japan and move to New York and enroll in JTS. And she was on her way to becoming a rabbi when, I don't know if I put this story in here, where right before ordination, like the day before ordination, the dean took her aside and said, I heard that you're a lesbian. We're not allowed to ordain lesbians. This is 5 years of rabbinical school, of her pouring her heart into Jewish studies. And so this is part of her story that I thought is worthy of sharing. It's audio only, and we'll listen to about 5 minutes. But in going back, you said Rabbi Schulweis was part of the changing of the conversation.
For sure, for sure.
Yeah. So you're talking about the 1992, I think, sermon?
You know, I remember, first of all, his Yom Kippur sermon on, quote unquote, the gay question. And he was a voice of what I now have a word for, but I didn't have a word for then. And he didn't use this word for himself, but the word is svara. It's moral intuition, moral conscience. He spoke not only from that place as a legitimate representative of the conservative movement and a leader of it, he also spoke to the necessity of Jewish law, of halacha, to incorporate moral conscience. And I remember standing and watching his keynote address to the Rabbinical Assembly in 1993, I think it was. Mm-hmm. And I was absolutely transfixed. You know, there are those moments when you remember what you wore and where you stood and what everything looked. It was one of those moments. I was in my second year of rabbinical school. I was at Ziegler. I started at Ziegler and then went to New York, JTS. And I was a student, and I watched him, and he spoke what I didn't have the words for. He was arguing for the tradition to have a moral conscience. And, you know, I printed out the text of that speech. And as I'm rereading it, I'm looking at all the different ways he argued for what I discovered is called svara. Now, svara is this notion that I discovered in the Talmud when I learned it, which I translate as moral intuition. And it is one of the 5 sources of Jewish law that you can cite to change the law. And it is the only source, other than a verse in the Torah itself, that can overturn a verse in the Torah itself. I was never taught this word, this idea, this mechanism of change in the tradition. And I want to back up and say that when we talk about halakha, Jewish law, you really have to understand it as a much broader statement of values than something legalistic or relevant only to someone who feels they are obligated to follow law. As one of my teachers, Rabbi Danny Gordis, once told me, and I'm paraphrasing him, he said, to the extent that the tradition cares about anything, it will use the language of law. So our vocabulary, our legal vocabulary is really our way of articulating what we care about. So as I'm rereading Rabbi Schulweis's speech, I highlighted some of these, what I think were translations for his idea of svara. And I asked myself, did he also not learn the term svara in rabbinical school? But listen, moral sensibility, moral conscience, morality, moral sensibility, moral vitality, moral idealism. He says it over and over and over and over. And what he's trying to argue for, and I think it created a hook in me that I didn't even realize I needed until years later, was the idea that our understanding of law has become divorced from our moral intuition. As a queer person who learned Talmud, I saw story after story, case after case after case of the rabbis using their moral intuition to overturn oppressive Torahitic ways of understanding. And it was only after I got out of rabbinical school, when I was on the faculty of Klal, this Jewish think tank, that I learned the word svara from my professor, who was my supervisor there, Klal, Dr. David Kramer, who had been my Talmud teacher at JTS, but I didn't learn that word there. To understand that moral intuition has always been part of our legal tradition and has always had the power to abrogate Torah law is to be able to argue from inside the tradition and to say, this is always how it's been and we've deviated. And I think that's a stronger argument than even Rabbi Schulweis was giving. And I started a yeshiva to raise up a generation of people who could understand that the necessity of bringing our svara, our lived life experiences, shaped by learning, to bear on the tradition, even to the point of overturning the Torah, where we deem it immoral, has always been native to our tradition. So I think Rabbi Schulweis planted seeds in me to be able to recognize and then find the vocabulary and the confidence to then do what he was advocating in that speech, which is to bring not just the elite of the legal scholars into the conversation, but the people whose lived experience really needs to be brought to bear on the tradition.
I cut her off in the middle of the last word I wanted her to say, of the tradition. I loved that our first two guests on the podcast were Rabbi Lizzie Heidemann and Rabbi B'nai Lappi, both who said, I didn't know Rabbi Schulweis. Why are you inviting me on a podcast about Rabbi Schulweis? I said, because I think that you are continuing his moral clarity, his moral courage into the next generation. I think it's important to hear your voice as much as it is to hear Ed Feinstein, David Wolpe, Noah Farkas, people who worked closely with him or knew him well. And then what was fascinating to me was both of them had stories about how Schulweis shaped their lives, convinced them to become rabbis, even though both of them thought, I have no connection to this man. And as we were talking on the podcast, here's B'nai Lappi, one of the great leaders of our religion right now, saying, I never met him, why are you asking me to talk about him? And then following up with, he's probably the reason why I'm a rabbi. You go, okay, well there's that. I want to play one more clip, and then I see that lunch is being set up, so we'll get to that. This one is by a voice that you should know, somebody who's in this room a few times during this presentation, who's Jackie Raffi, the incredible, the amazing, the wonderful, the talented.
Welcome to the moral...
Oh, here we go.
How did this happen? What's the genesis?
Here's how great Cantor Jackie Raffi is our Rabbi Emeritus, is Richard Spiegel, who I love Rabbi Spiegel so much. He is as good an emeritus as any young rabbi can ask for. And on Rosh Hashanah, I said, do you want to come speak at our synagogue on Rosh Hashanah? We would love to have your wisdom from the Bima. He said, I'm going to VBS. I love Cantor Raffi. That's how good... Anyway, he ended up getting sick, but that's okay. He's healthy now. But she's wonderful. I just saw her in the hallway, which was a nice treat. And again, the conversation that happened here, I don't know, about 4 years ago, when there was the exodus of rabbis from this synagogue, right? Rabbi Taft, Rabbi Farkas, Rabbi Hoffman, Rabbi Feinstein were all stepping away for or stepping down or whatever it was for different reasons. And the question was, the house that Rabbi Schulweis built, the people who are taking over as leaders here, are going to be the first generation in 50 years who didn't know Rabbi Schulweis. How do you continue with Rabbi Schulweis's vision, moral clarity in the next generation? And that had to happen at some point, right? There was somebody who never knew Moses who became the leader of the Jewish people. And at some point, that person was able to lead, not because they were Moses' son or protege, but because at some point they understood what the calling was. And so to talk to Jackie Raffi, who didn't know Rabbi Schulweis, and yet was here and on her first day was given a book of his poetry, and what she did with that. So we'll play again about 5 minutes of my conversation with her. It's really weird to hear your own voice, especially to be talking into a microphone and then hear yourself.
Of this piece.
So Schulweis obviously was a prolific speaker and writer. And I had always heard about his poetry. And when I first got to VBS, I'm holding up, our listeners can't see, but I'm holding up Rabbi Harold M. Schulweis Passages in Poetry with music by Aminadav Aloni. Mm-hmm. And this is a wonderful book that Marcy Rainey loaned me, who's active in HMSI. And basically it has selected pieces of poetry that Rabbi Schulweis wrote on one side. And on the other side, there's notated music that Ami Aloni, who was the music director here for many years, and who also has a great legacy of music here. He set those pieces to music. So that was kind of the first thing I heard, even predating coming to VBS. I learned about Ami Aloni's music in cantorial school. So coming and seeing that, wow, there was this synergy between the legendary Rabbi Schulweis and this music director and composer, Ami Aloni. How wonderful. And then once I started here, I helped revive the VBS Adult Choir, which is now the VBS Community Choir under Dr. Noreen Green. And also they had a lot of experience singing Ami's pieces, in particular, Black into White, which is Rabbi Schulweis's Havdalah interpretive poem that Ami Aloni set to music, and we sang that for Slichut. So I was exposed to all of this incredible collaboration between the two. And as we were celebrating this year, as we were talking about planning on December 20th, Ami Aloni's 25th yard site and Rabbi Schulweis's 10th yard site, and the commemoration of that, which we do every year, Rabbi Schulweis's yard site, we do a commemoration on a Friday night in December. And as we were talking about that, we were thinking, let's do some of these pieces. Let's present some of this music that is Rabbi Schulweis's poetry set to music and his writings set to music. And we came up, with Ami Aloni's Or Ha'am. This was Dr. Noreen Green's idea. Beautiful oratorio, and she brought the Los Angeles Jewish Symphony here for that. Oh, wow. And so we were, incredible, 30-piece orchestra. So, okay, we're going to do that. We're going to do Russell Steinberg, who wrote a classical piece of music based on one of Schulweis's writings. And we were like, what else should we do? And then I had this grand idea, like maybe I'll write something. There hasn't been nobody since Ami Aloni and Russell Steinberg that I know of has set any of the pieces to music. None of the other, a woman has set his pieces to music, and I feel now, responsible, carrying on the legacy of the reigns of the cantorate here at VBS that I've inherited from such greats before me. I felt like this is a great opportunity to write something. So I embarked on a journey of researching his poetry, and I pored over his poems on the HMSI website. This is probably a longer story than you asked for.
No, this is I've never written a piece of music, and I've read so much of his poetry, and I read it and I go, I can share this from the Bima or something, but I never think of how do we put this to music? So for me, this is incredible.
Well, I love setting text to music because prior to my cantorial days, I wrote pop music, like as a hobby. Yeah, and I always had you can go on YouTube. I probably shouldn't say this because now you're going to go on YouTube and hear all my pops, my like angsty pop songs from my 20s. But I always had trouble with lyrics, and like melody seems to flow to me a lot more easily. So, which is why I've really found as a composer of Jewish music, that's really my niche, and that's really where I thrive because we have all these beautiful texts. So now, like to have all of this prolific writing that in Rabbi Schulweis's brilliance that he left behind for us. It was so inspiring to read through his poetry. And I will say, a lot of his poetry is prose. It doesn't rhyme. It's long, it's esoteric, and very, very deep and profound. So I was looking for a piece that was lyrical, and I came across this poem that I set to music, that was based on Rabbi Schulweis's interpretation. As soon as you read it, you can see that it is based on Adonai Sefatai Tiftach.
Yeah, the line that we say before the Amidah to kind of get us in the mind space.
Exactly. And the poem is, there are prayers that no one can write for me, tears that no one can shed for me, judgments that no one can render for me. And then it says, in the silent Amidah, we confront that which is hidden from ourselves. And it goes on. It's about 8 lines of a poem. And I said, wow, what an interpretation of Adonai Sefatai Tiftach. Wow. And I sat at the piano and I had the poem printed in big font in front of me, and I just started playing. Something like within 5 minutes, I had a melody that had come to me based on these words. And then I added the Hebrew, and then I added kind of a harmony line. And over a couple days, I wrote this piece. And knowing that a 30-piece orchestra would be performing it, I mean, what a blessing and what an opportunity. We have an associate music director here, my colleague Daniel Reisman, who's an arranger in his own right, and he arranged it for orchestra and for SATB choir using my, some of the harmonies that I had and some of the ideas I had for like how it'll start and how it'll end, and created this piece that was debuted on December 20th at that commemoration. So it was really meaningful process. I felt like I was having a conversation with Rabbi Schulweis as I was writing.
I don't need to play much more. It was a wonderful conversation with her. If you prefer, you can listen to her talk at half speed on the podcast app, because she and also Mayim Bialik, Bill made the good decision to split Mayim Bialik's talk into 2 episodes. First of all, it was long. It was over an hour, so now it's 2 30-minute episodes. And second of all, Mayim speaks like Cantor Raffi very quickly, something that I am aware that I do too, and also I have learned from enough people giving me stern talkings too. After a sermon, they'll say, I couldn't hear what you said, it was too fast. And so I've learned that sometimes when I remember, I slow down. There's so much more on the Schulweis Institute's website. We're still looking for more interviews, some with people who knew him closely. We have a conversation, I believe, with Judy Cotton coming up, who many of you know. She was a president of the synagogue. She has great Schulweis stories. We're going to try to incorporate some of Rabbi Schulweis's words themselves into the podcast. Sometimes we read his poetry on there, but as a way to keep his legacy alive so that other people who didn't know him could learn his brilliance, and some who knew him well have a place to go to talk about him. I realize that people are hungry. We'll take a few questions in case there are some. I brought also one of his poems that I'll just leave up here because I love this poem, and it felt like it goes well with the Torah portion that just ended. So, not that you could read that. That's hard for me to read. All right, yes? You want the microphone? I know,
I don't project well. What I said was that a brief statement and then a question for you. Len and I joined this congregation because we found out that Rabbi Schulweis would have, events, celebrations of bringing back Holocaust survivors with the people that helped them survive. I think that's very powerful. And it kind of fits with what you've been talking about. So I have a question for you about Midrash. Oh. To me, Midrash is extremely important because in the same way that all living things evolve or they die, I thought to myself, well used, the Midrash would be a place where we evolve. I don't know if that's what's really happening because I don't know exactly what goes on behind closed doors. What is your opinion about that? Is that the right track or not the right track of what you're discussing?
I don't know if wait, your question is?
The Midrash. And does the Midrash, in a sense, reflect Rabbi Schulweis's intent to try to interpret and then act? Or am I
on his theology? Or just in general?
Well, just in general. I mean, the whole concept of Midrash is to challenge what you're reading and interpret it. Isn't that right?
Right. And also, we are not Torah Jews. If you read the Torah, there are 613 mitzvot, commandments. We do almost none of them the way they're written in the Torah. It took centuries of sages in the Talmud and the Midrash to help us understand what they are. And the question is that I get into fights with my more religious family about is, did those conversations stop 1,500 years ago, or are they still ongoing? Can we still re-understand the world? It's one of my favorite passages of Talmud is, it's from 1,800 years ago. It's a group of rabbis debating why bad things happen to good people. And the fact that we have those conversations, and they had those conversations, lets us see ourselves in them and makes it so that you don't think of yourself as a bad Jew if you question God or your theology. The rabbis, the sages, the Talmudists of centuries, millennia ago, did the same thing. And so I think one of Rabbi Schulweis's great works was reminding us that this is still alive. The Torah is not a dead document that we keep in the Aron. It is something that changes every year, right? This year, reading Noah's Ark, reading Parshat Noach 2 days ago, was different than how I read it in the past. And so that's part of the work of Midrash. That's part of the work of a great rabbi to remind us this is important and it's still alive. Was there one last question? before somebody leads us in Motzi? Who's the youngest one here to lead us in Motzi? Okay. I know, but I meant of you. We get into a fight. A pleasure to learn with you. If you ever have questions about the Schulweis Institute, their event coming up on December 19th, which is sure to be amazing, or anything on the podcast, you want help finding it on your phone, Bill is our resident expert. Sylvia is our resident expert. There's some wonderful people here who are working hard to keep Rabbi Schulweis's legacy alive. And it's a beautiful thing to know that his life, his career, his legacy lives on in new generations of people who are also struggling with their Judaism and find it in his words still, which is amazing. So thank you all. Have a great day. Shavua Tov.
Rabbi, thank you. A couple of comments before we adjourn. First of all, we have a notable guest with us today, which in the back of the room is Sylvia Bernstein-Tragub. She is the leader of the Schulweis Institute. She's the chair of the board or some exalted title and deserves every bit of it. Sylvia, thank you very much for joining us today and for your leadership. We have material on the Institute outside on the tables that we left for you. And Sylvia is, just so you know, leading an initiative to recruit some younger people onto the Schulweis Institute board, which is very well needed. And she's got a brilliant campaign underway to do that, based on many of the families at Valley Beth Shiloh at the moment. Rabbi, how do I thank you?
Thank you.
Not just for today, but when we looked for someone to run the podcast program, Rabbi Ari was our first choice, and it's been amazing. So thank you. We're over 1,000 downloads at this point and going. So thank you very much. I have general announcements.